This is going to be part two about losses that are other than death and the grief that accompanies them. Some of those losses have different impacts depending on when they happen, where they happen, the time they happen, the part of our lives we're in. Some will be physical losses that we experience, some are emotional losses that we experience, and the level of impact differs for all of them. If we see them as a disruption to our life, it is much different than if it is just a brief sense of loss to an event that happens in our life. It also depends on how society and the institutions in society deal with our loss. For example, if something happened that you were no longer able to walk and you had to rely on supports or a wheelchair or something, the impact on your life is going to matter on whether or not we can help you get to work. Can we provide you with transportation to complete all the things you need to do in your life? Or are you going to have to stay isolated at home? The loss of that ability to walk is going to be very different if you cannot hold on to your job and cannot continue to provide for yourself, and you have to just stay home and be in the house all the time. It makes a big difference. It also makes a difference if you have an illness at age 8 and it leads to a loss versus an illness at, say, age 30 that leads to a loss. And that is different than if you are at age 80 and you come down with an illness. And that same illness can feel different at different years. Let's take a look at one example. If somebody is born with cystic fibrosis, they have an ongoing difficulty breathing. If someone is a smoker and after 30 years of smoking they develop COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, they're going to both face losses. But it's different when you are born with it and you have no control versus if it's something that happens after years of your own behavior. But it's still a loss, right? Finally, all these losses are also going to be impacted on you by the way you view challenges. Do you accept the challenge and you say, I'm willing to work around it? Or are you unable to be able to deal with the challenge and you are opposing it and fighting it the entire time? I'm going to be asking you questions that relate to all of these things and loss so that you can really give some thought to the different impacts. For our assignment, I'm going to ask you to think about the experiences that people have in their life and adapting to it, but thinking about a 7-year-old and how they adapt to something that happens. Thinking about a 21-year-old, for example, who loses a leg to cancer, as opposed to a 40-year-old who develops a speech challenge because they have an aneurysm. Think about a 70-year-old who is diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. I'm going to ask you to think and write a sentence or two about those losses, how they are experiences individually, if they are permanent, or if it's just temporary. I'm asking you to take a look at whether accommodations can help that loss be more accepted or whether it sets off more grief. Importantly, there are also disappointments that happen in people's life that can feel like a loss and require some grieving. Some of these can be as complicated as a lawyer who gets through law school but is never able to pass the bar exam or is never able to become a partner in a law firm. What does that loss feel like? Or a child who spends his entire life thinking, I'm going to get involved in sports, I want to be a professional sports player, and then in 11th grade finds that he needs to quit school and quit all the sports he's in because he needs to get a job to help his family and even engage in activities that are illegal to support his family. What happens to him and the loss of that dream? I want you to think about that too. How many goals and dreams have you had that you have not been able to fulfill? Have they been fulfilled in part but not whole? And how did that impact you? Also, what about losses that happen over things that we think will be automatic in life? Many people, maybe most people, think they'll get married automatically in life, think they'll have children at some point in life, they think they'll drive a car at some point, maybe even own a car. How does that impact you if you thought that would be automatic, but you aren't finding a partner, or you find out you cannot have a child, or for some reason you're never able to get a car? What happens on those losses? I want you to think about disappointments and losses that are faced by groups. For example, a football team that loses a championship, What about political campaign volunteers when the campaign is over and the candidate lost? What about people who have volunteered and fought for causes like women's rights and they don't see that that cause is able to be fulfilled? Do they experience loss? What about countries who are in wars and they lose the war? What about their young children and adult 21-year-olds who are off to war and lose their lives in that battle? What kind of a loss is that for that country? And finally, I want you to think about losses that are visible and invisible. Certainly, if something happens to our physical body, that becomes a visible loss. But there are also invisible losses. Invisible losses can include when someone loses their culture as they are adjusting to society. We lose our childhood, that's an invisible loss. Losing the innocence of childhood, actually. Losing the comfort of middle age as we age and go into a sense of elderly living. Losing the confidence and safety that one can have if they have to face poverty. Losing your self-esteem and your confidence because of cruelty by others. This will all be in the written assignment that you're going to do next, but I want you to think about a sentence or two too, about a goal or a dream that you have accepted as a loss. I'd like you to share about whether you've lost anything as a member of a group, as a team, as a culture, or in a school. So think about this. This class is about grief and loss, but it's not just about grief that goes with death. So thanks. See you in the assignment.